sure I get all the right information. 1 second. All right, so honored to introduce Jesse Alexander this morning. So Jesse has over 40 years experience in informal STEM education, technical training, knowledge management, information architecture, technical content development, project management, wireless system design, secure knowledge systems management, and telecommunications system design. He's designed curricula, documentation, user guides, embedded systems, and processes. He's a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, Radio Club of America, ARRL, the OMIK Amateur Radio Association. He's an award-winning poet, maker, hacker, tinkerer, and volunteer emergency communicator, amateur radio call sign WB2IFS. So Mr. Alexander graduated cum laude from Tau Beta Pi with a Bachelor of Science and Master of Engineering degrees in Electrical Engineering from Howard University, Washington, D.C. So please welcome Mr. Jesse Alexander.
All right, who was that guy? Who were they talking? Oh, never mind. Let's get started. All right, this is what we're going to do. Everyone here knows what ham radio is. Is there anyone here who doesn't? Okay, never mind. I've got a little treat for you either way. We're going to talk about how I got started in ham radio and in general in STEM, and then we're going to talk about the NRAO ham radio project, what's next, I think, for ham radio, and answer any questions you have. We'll do 73s. Dedication. I'm dedicating this talk to my father, who passed away recently in June, and my brother, James. My father has the same name as I do. My brother, James, who passed away last September. All right, let's see if this works. Here's my little treat. May the internet gods be pleased.
You won't believe it. You won't believe it. But you can talk to someone in space. Sam from Earth, calling space station. Can you hear me? This is Sam from Earth. Can you hear me?
If you want to talk to space, you need a really big antenna, multi-elemented and made of aluminum.
Calling the space station. Can you hear me? This is Sam from Earth, calling the space station. Can you hear me?
Sam from Earth. 聞こえますか？聞こえますよ。
こんにちは。こちらは
ジャパニーズスペースステーションです。もしもし、連絡してくれてありがとう。聞こえますよ。
Video before. Oh, thanks. How many people have seen that? How many people have seen that? I've seen that video. First time I saw it, I cried. I teared up. Because that's what it is. That's what it is. Now, there's some inaccuracies, like why does he need a welding helmet when he's soldering? But, you know, and the call signs, Sam, you know, we can have that whole conversation. But I think it captures the feel, the experience, the fun, the joy of ham radio. And it was the first time I had seen a person of color engaged in ham radio. And this, this is a commercial from, I think it's targeting parts of West Africa, just judging from some of the clothes that people are wearing, may even be Southern Africa because people are dressed warmly, some of the women are dressed warmly. But what I like about it is it shows the person in a family, and the family somewhat supporting him and shocked when I guess they lost a dinner that night when he was able to make contact. This is how I got started. I got started at home. This is my mother, my muse, my STEM enabler. This is me in my house and my room playing around with, just before I got licensed. I discovered ham radio, believe it or not, the local public library. There was QST, and people were communicating from all over the world, and I was like, whoa, this is cool. So I got involved with that, and here I am in the Montclair High School Ham Radio Club. See if you can find me, that's me right there. I think only 2 of us are still licensed. Dave, I actually talked with Dave. He used to be WA2TRF. I think now he's K7TRF or something like that. He's actually in this area. And he worked for Motorola, retired, and a whole bunch of interesting parallel tracks. I worked for AT&T, he worked for Motorola. Kind of an interesting thing. Here is me. I am building Heathkit, yet another one. As you can see, there is a DX60B here, an old tube rig that I still have in a closet. I can tell this is after I started at Howard because I can see my HU t-shirt, and looks like I'm building a kit there. There's a soldering iron, and no, I don't have a welding helmet. I don't need that. Anyway, here I am again. This is a program at AT&T Bell Labs. This was the ABC program. I had forgotten about this, and when I was going through my father's effects, I found this. My father saved everything that happened to the kids, every award, every situation. So here I am in the ABC program where Bell Labs had begun to reach out to people at minority serving institutions, HBCUs. Mine is Howard, and they reached out to us and brought us into the corporation. After a lot of pressure from the community, people were saying, why should we buy products and services from companies where we can't work? So there was a lot of pressure, and so that was the result. I was one of the results of that pressure. Moving on, I kept in ham radio. I kind of was QRT for a while, and then there's that little thing that happened in New York City. Just yesterday was the anniversary. I happened to be in Montclair at the time, and basically I reached for the radio. When this happened, I reached for the radio and kept going. I started out on Echolink, believe it or not. Most of my rigs were in storage, and I had a HT that batteries had exploded. So, but I started with Echolink, and I should also say I was between jobs, so I didn't have a lot of money for radio. But eventually it got back on HF and VHF, UHF. And I moved to Maryland to take a job at the US Patent Office, and that didn't work out. So, but anyway, I'm now in Maryland, and here I am at National Night Out doing an emergency demonstration, and I also was privileged to be part of a National Maker Faire where I did I think I found out later, it was one of the first ham radio exhibits at a Maker Faire, and we won Best in Show and lots of other cool awards, and that was great. I was there with team members from Amateur Radio Emergency Service in Prince George's County. All right. Now, what is all that to say? I had a lot of support. I was privileged. I have 2 parents. I'm actually 4th generation college. I have 2 parents, dad with dual master's degrees in organizational administration and human resources, mom with a master's degree in early childhood education. I come from a family of overachievers. You know, a bunch of my uncles are theologian, another one is a physicist who worked at Wright-Patterson. We could just go down the whole list. Surprisingly, I'm the only ham, interestingly. But anyway, this is all about creating, all about how my STEM identity is formed. And the concept of STEM identity you can find at this website. And it's basically the ability to demonstrate competence, performance, and get recognition for the work that you do as a STEM person and as a person involved in STEM. And ham radio was part of my STEM identity. In fact, when I could not, after early retirement from AT&T, I had trouble finding jobs as an electrical engineer, but I kept going with ham because I could still get the 3 aspects shown here from ham radio, independent of work. And I think that's very important for people to understand, especially young folks, is that this ham radio was my way of maintaining STEM identity, even in the face of discrimination and age discrimination and race discrimination. So, and the other part of the STEM identity, and you can see that from my story, and even from the story of the little hypothetical kid, that we had support from family. And that's what I'm talking about, is really an ecosystem. I found this great graphic, and all aspects of these institutions and meeting grounds and places in the commons were things that I found supportive back in my time when I was first starting out. So some of these things are obvious. Recognition is passing the FCC exam. Performance is doing it. As far as government institutions are concerned, we were involved in church, and church, one of the cool things about church is back in the day, is when you did anything cool as a kid, people talked about it, and it was in the newsletter, so you got recognition and acknowledgement. My mother used to take me on trips to museums, so that was a chance to get competence and get comfortable with STEM work. In work, later, as I said, I was part of the Bell Labs Amateur Radio Club, and for those of you who are young and getting started out, ham radio doesn't necessarily lead to a job, but let's put it this way. Back in the day, my boss was a ham. My colleagues, hams. His boss, ham. I can't prove that they hired me because of the ham radio license, but like some cartoon used to care, I think it was Bugs Bunny used to say, it sure helps. So that's something to keep in mind, and that was also part of an ecosystem, right? That was also part of the ecosystem. That encourages me. That people are like, you're a ham? Yeah, I'm a ham, and what's your call sign? You know, we had that whole conversation just like we had here. There was support from community organizations. My father is Army Corps of Engineer person, and I'll tell you a little story. He helped me put up my first antenna. It was long wire in the backyard. Went from a oak tree to a pine tree in the backyard. He mounted it, helped me mount the whole thing on springs. So 20 years after that, 20 years after that, I'm in the post office talking with someone, and they say, did you used to live on that house in Madison Avenue? I said, yeah. He said, well, there's this wire coming out, you know, and it goes to these trees, and what is that? I mean, we didn't want to remove it. It's been there. And I was cracking up. And she's like, what's so funny? I said, is that still there? And she's like, yeah. I said, you can take it down. It was my antenna when I was 15 years old. You can take it down. So that was Dad's knowledge of STEM, you know, in the Army Corps of Engineers. And guess what? I have an off-center fed dipole in Maryland. And what's on the end of the springs on each end, okay? Anyway, let's see, competence, again, QST, license manuals, chance to develop, and on and on and on, Montclair High School Club. Back in the day, we had Mr. Wizard as and Cosmos as the shows. And of course, the performance on the air, getting recognition and and a chance to perform on the air. I started off as WN2IFS, so I was doing all Morse code. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Ham Radio Project, which I was part of for about 2.5 years recently. It was an ARDC-funded project. As I understand it, John Hayes, the outreach person from ARDC, approached the National Radio Astronomy Observatory because the National Radio Astronomy Observatory at the time had programs. You know, mine was a little project. They had programs with alumni. Some of the programs were decades long, and actually people came back from grad school and supported the project. So anyway, out of this, from a human standpoint, we got 17 new licensees, and the curriculum published and delivered. And that was the main delivery. The targeted population were people who were heretofore underrepresented in both ham radio and radio astronomy, and on and on and on. So that's what that was about. And I should also say, big shout out to Ham Sci. They helped us tremendously. Some of our students had a chance to actually do academic presentations and other things. That was just great. That worked out really good, and that fits right in with the ARDC's model of knitting together various projects, and so that was great. So that was that. We had a no-cost extension through this last June, and that was basically running the same curriculum, redesigned slightly for clubs, for groups. So we ran 2 clubs through the project, Boys and Girls Club in Charlottesville and Pacifica Knowledge Bank in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this was an interesting situation. People were able to work across time zones. I don't have the numbers about how many licensees we got, but this is a very interesting thing because the New Zealand licensees got their amateur radio call signs in this country under FCC, which is perfectly legal. A lot of people from other countries do that. The challenge is, though, for them to operate in country in Aotearoa, they have to be basically extra class. That's the equivalent ham radio in Aotearoa. So that was very interesting. So I don't know where they are. I'd like to know and find out more about that. Now we come to the bad stuff. Along comes a little nasty, and I'll say it, racist executive order. Supervisor for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which this program was run from, fired. Team disbanded. Scrubbing of all, quote, DEI-related language from all the websites. This came down from the National Science Foundation, okay? So essentially, and I was asked to leave a little bit ahead of schedule. So essentially, not only did the executive order basically end the program, it erased the existence of the program. My project was a small project. I mentioned there were several other projects that NRAO had in the works, and there were alumni. All but one has been terminated as a result of that. So we've had people in grad school, there are people coming back who wanted to be mentors, all of that canceled, okay? So there we go. And my project I was involved in leading, it was targeting BIPOC and LGBTQIA students. So that was the end of that. So the curricula are still available. They're still up for anyone to access. It's all open source as part of the agreement, but keep in mind they have been scrubbed of a lot of the content, of a lot of the content that I thought made it valuable. So what's next for ham radio? Here's my lovely bride, Carol, opening the TARDIS. Don't go in there, honey. Anyway, too late. What does hamming look like in the apocalypse? We're in the middle of a crazy-making situation, multiple crazy-making situations. There's just all kinds of crazy things. This is a story that really touched my heart because this kid got involved with white supremacist ideology and killed himself after killing some other students. I mean, it's just crazy. Suicide rates are hockey sticks for young people. That's nuts. Just yesterday, my phone was blowing up. I'm like, what's going on? And multiple historically black colleges were threatened yesterday. And credible enough for them to shut down classes and that kind of thing. And I was like, what's the connection? Well, it turns out the person who was shot in Utah was a person who was harassing and coming after a bunch of professors. So we don't know who or why. Well, we know why, but it looks like after he was shot, someone decided to come after HBCUs. So all of this craziness is going on. But I think ham radio, in a lot of ways, just from my own personal experience, could help as a form of human-to-human communication. You know, what's the most important thing about ham radio? The stories we tell. The stories about the antenna that fell, and we're still communicating. The stories I tell about the 2 teachers in Montclair Public School System who elmered me through, helped me get my novice, and pass my novice exam in their house as the red ants were eating me as I'm taking the exam. That's where I think ham radio can be of service and of help. We have mentoring and people building, rebuilding. In this case, this is at a cafe, repair cafe. Here I am with one of my mentees, who interestingly enough is a dreamer. So he and his folks came here undocumented. And theoretically, he could be targeted. So I'm not going to name him, all right? But a good person, good young man, working hard, and that kind of thing. Here I am with a group of people. Again, another part of ham radio is building things together, working together, creating things in a human level. Here we are actually, believe it or not, we're building building crystal radios. But there's a slight issue. If you look really carefully up here, you can see the dish of the Green Bank Observatory. So we're building AM radios in the National Quiet Zone. So let's just say they didn't work too well, and we left that as an exercise. Everyone built them successful, and we said take them home and throw some wires over some trees and it should work. This is at a ham fest that I was in Maryland. This is a team from one of the local high schools, First Robotics. How many people have been involved with First Robotics? Yeah, First Robotics team. Again, this shows the human connections, right? This gentleman in the back graduated from high school. He came back as a coach to help the high school team. There are people here who are freshmen all the way up to seniors in this team. This is what I'm talking about, human-to-human communication, human-to-human work, right? And here's a class, and so I'll talk more about that. But I was really inspired to hear Robert Putnam. I don't know how many people are familiar with Robert Putnam's work. Out-fricking-standing. I would recommend, if you're like me, I want the good news first, right? I'd recommend reading this. I'm going to get it and read it on Libby, The Upswing. He's talking about how we can bring things together, again, and bring people back together. I think ham radio could be a vehicle for doing that, all right? And I don't know if I'm ready for Bowling Alone, but I think I'll read this one. I heard him on a podcast. It was outstanding. What else? Another thing that I've been talking with, and this is a slide that some of you may have seen before, this really inspired me. I was involved with this group, Encore, which is an organization that I think started out as a way for people who are retired to re-enter the workforce as mentors and and helpers and that kind of thing. Great organization. They had this report that I thought was fascinating. It talked about the desire for people to work across generations and communicate across generations. Here we go again with human-to-human communications, right? And maybe I'm a little naive, but I think it's harder to hate someone that you have a relationship with. Well, then again, I don't know. I'm thinking about some family members. But anyway, it's harder, let's just say it's harder you would think in theory that it's harder. Here's someone from the ARRL complaining about not having new blood, right? And so on one side, we've got very expensive spectrum and hard to get access, but we have a way of getting access. That's ham radio. And on this other side here, we've got kids who are keen on working together across generations. And I'm saying this again, consider the kid that's really excited, that does not look like you, and maybe English is not their first language. Consider mentoring, elmering them, please. because I see ham radio as a potential bridge and bridging across this gap, but also helping us with the isolation that many of us are feeling and struggling with, which I think is leading to all the craziness that's going on. So we're back to this picture again. This is my future. And again, I see connections that people can form using ham radios between states, state and local government. A lot of stuff is not happening from I'm from Maryland. Maryland has literally been told, no, you don't get emergency tax dollars from the federal government. You don't get your tax dollars back, and because we don't like Maryland. I mean, really? So we need to look locally, I think, in terms of emergency services and support and IMCOM and that kind of thing. I see science museums. I used to work at Liberty Science Center in Jersey City. How many people have been to Liberty Science Center? No one? Go to Liberty Science Center. Go to your local science centers. There's all kinds of cool stuff there. And I was trying to get them to start a ham radio club. Everywhere I go, I try to get someone to start a club. But anyway, you know, a lot of these things are privately funded, so they're not impacted by executive orders, at least not directly. So they're still there, they're still operating. There's a lot of private museums and that kind of thing, so keep that in mind. And museums are also places to do informal education and also STEM ecosystem projects. And in this sort of middle tier, we've got work, and I talk about ham clubs at corporations, at my company. Some of them are still limping along, and they're still doing stuff, and there's a lot of emergency response internal to companies, too. And the same is true actually up here with the religious institutions. I'm also seeing uses for ham radio for National Night Out and for field day demonstrations. All of you know that. A lot of you participate in field day. I also see protests, use of ham radio in protests and street medic support. If you want to see an interesting video, it's rather long, but do a search in YouTube on the Women's March and ham radio, and you're going to see a very interesting video. A lot of the people who support the Marine Marathon were involved in supporting the Women's March a long time ago. So that I see more of that type of thing occurring. The other thing is National Night Out used to be people coming out of their houses and acknowledging and having like a block party, and it got into this big complicated thing with police and that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be that way. It could literally be people outside of their houses saying, this is our space, and we're going to look out and protect each other. Moving on. Media gives us opportunity for cross-fertilization, cross-communications. I keep thinking about something that was going on a while back where I think there were protesters in one part of the world who reached out to protesters in a Black Lives Matter meeting, Black Lives Matter protest, and they were telling them how to survive tear gas. And if memory serves, it was people in Gaza telling people, you know, I mean, that kind of communication is going to have to be critical for us to survive the craziness that's going on. And you know so we've got the little college thing here and a high school. I like to see collegiate clubs knitting together and communicating. When I was at HamSci, there was this great roundtable of all the collegiate clubs. That was outstanding. It was really great to see young people communicating that way and figuring out how to support each other. I also see, of course, a role for GNU radio. I used WebSDR in my curriculum. WebSDR is written into my curriculum. I love WebSDR. My first receiver was a Lafayette HA600A that my dad and I bought at a pawn shop, okay? You don't need to do that. You can just go to websdr.org and pick a receiver and listen to meteor scatter. Pick a receiver, and there's even I found a lesson plan. It looked a little complicated, but I found a lesson plan where you can use WebSDR basically in one window, and then you can pipe the audio, pipe the signals into another window and decode some of the satellite imagery coming out of the ISS. So that's already in the curriculum. I don't think it got wiped out, but young people, you all have this great SDR opportunity to, and I love telling the kids in the program, you can't break anything. Get on it, play with it. You know, see what hams sound like, right? Okay, this signal doesn't sound right, sounds kind of weird. Try tuning it. Try turning the modulation. You know, you can do that. It's great. There's no smoke, there's no breaking, there's no teacher coming and you're ruining our valuable equipment, stop it. You know, nothing like that, you know? So that's a big role, I think, for SDRs. Libraries is another hidden resource, I think, that a lot of people sort of take for granted. Yes, they are under attack, the funding is being threatened, but ham clubs meet in libraries. Why not have a ham station in a library? Why not have a public go-to station that's there? You just come in, slip your license in a nice little Lucite display and get on the air. You don't have to have expensive radios at your house. We also talked about equipment library with some of the folks at HamSci. The idea of sharing ham equipment. You have extra equipment, someone needs some equipment. Why not allow them to borrow it? And how does that work? And how do we manage that? And how do we keep the equipment calibrated and all that good stuff? That library, I think, can serve in a very important and significant role in the future as we keep going. So, this is the whole picture. What questions do you have? Thank you. Oh, here's my contact information in the QR code. And if you want to just reach out to me, send me email questions privately, wb2ifs@gmail.com. But anyway, let's go back to questions. I see someone with the mic. Go for it.
Yeah, great talk. Thanks. Great talk, thanks. One thing I'd mention is that for people that have kids that might be approaching college age, there's a lot of ham-related scholarships available.
Yes.
There's a guy in my community that recently wrote up how a substantial portion of his daughter's college expenses at the University of Oregon are paid by ham-related scholarships. So that's a great thing. Get involved with STEM stuff, even if you're maybe not doing a STEM curriculum, and get some money while you're at it.
Absolutely. Agreed, absolutely. He was talking about ham scholarships for those who didn't hear. I think that's great. I think ham scholarships are great. We actually had Steve Goodgame from ARRL talk to our students, and he said, keep your QRZ pages up to date. Make sure that they're clean, because that's part of the criteria they use for determining whether or not you get scholarships. So, yes, that's another example of how you can profit from ham radio. Oh. Questions?
Yeah, you'd mentioned a couple successes that have since been canceled. Can you give examples of barriers that exist today for diverse youth that maybe we could help resolve, like some low-hanging fruit? Okay,
all right. Some barriers to help diverse students that you could help resolve. Mentor someone. Find someone who's interested in the radio. The kid that's lingering, after you give the presentation, you do the the kid that's standing by the radio. Invite them, sit them down. Here, take this mic. And they're like, Don't be afraid, all right? We're gonna talk to someone friendly. A lot of the students, we did First Contact Awards, and that was big. I mean, some of us, you're like, oh, this is corny. It's just a little, PDF, and you put their name and call sign in it. It's really important to give them the recognition. So I think the thing that was most valuable to me was mentoring them, Mentoring, I'm using mentoring because it's not gendered, and I know that some people have problems with Elmer because they're thinking Elmer Fudd and that kind of thing. That is a big one. It's a small thing, but a big thing. The kid that shows up after class, the kid you do a demo, the kids that still hang around, that's really important. That's something simple you can do. And don't be afraid to show up at HBCUs or minority serving institutions. Don't be afraid to go there. Go there and talk with the people, the students and the professors and that kind of thing. I think we really need to make a case for RF stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself and I'm expanding on your question, but we need to make the case for RF. My alma mater, I invited them to a discussion about, I think it was a magnetometer project that NASA was doing. One of the professors said, we're not interested. Unless it's got AI involved, we have no interest in that. Well, I mean, that's something else that we need to work on. So I hope I answered your question in my long and circuitous way. Any other questions? Oh.
So it's relatively easy to find your way into amateur radio, and of course you're constantly barraged to get your license. But then there's a big disconnect because bright techie kids look for bright techie things to do, and they can't find them, and especially they can't find each other. So any suggestions on where to point them or where to hang out to help them for those of us who want to encourage the next generation that does weird and wacky stuff compared to mainstream amateur radio, like data?
Yeah, I would suggest a bunch of things. I would suggest meeting the young people where they are, right? So you and I discussed yesterday Meshtastic, right? Meshtastic actually covers part of the amateur band. And you could sort of operate as an amateur, and then you can also operate just as pure Meshtastic. I think Meshtastic has a lot of potential because it is data communication and it is texting. And I think a lot of young people find that fun. I think, too often we are talking at young people instead of talking with young people. And I think we ought to ask them, well, what do you want to do, right? What do you like doing? And if it's texting, then we can find out ways of doing texting. We can use APRS and text each other with APRS, and we can have the APRS system. I hope the servers are still running. You can send an APRS message to X, I guess it is now, and have it displayed, or Mastodon and have it displayed, and that kind of thing. I think we ought to start asking young people what they want. What are their goals? What does it look like for them? Because it's not like the old days. I've got a bunch of boat anchors I'm trying to get rid of, but I don't think any of my young people, any of them would be interested. So I think let's meet them where they are. Another thing I think that's really important to young people is emergency communications. They want to be useful. They want to be helpful. They want to be engaged with that. And we've got to take it beyond the usual model of Aries and Mars and et cetera, and start looking at, I don't know how else to describe it, but self-organizing teams. I've watched young people do hack fests and that kind of thing. I've watched young people respond to, I love the whole Occupy Sandy movement. Young people built teams from scratch like that and then tore them down when the project, that's just cool. I'd love to learn that. So we're back to the multi-generational way of learning. I'd like to have young people teach me how to do that because I'm used to this top-down structure thing, and the org chart and the, arrows and the dotted lines and, and all this. This guy's matrix to that guy. That's what I'm used to. Occupy Sandy. Look up Occupy Sandy and look at some of the images there, and then see how ham radio can wheedle in and fit into some of that. That's a big thing. So we're going to see more of that as the investment in FEMA and some of these organizations like CERT is on the decline. And that's my long answer to your short question.
If you have more questions, make sure to talk to Jesse offline. We're going to move on to the next speaker, but let's do one more round of applause for Jesse. That was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
We also have a little token of appreciation for you.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then Garrett Von Hoy, I think, is the next speaker. So come on up.
Let me try. How do I? Give me a sec. Try to just do that. Yeah. Okay. All right, so my name is Garrett Van Hoy. So I've been working at Peraton Labs for a little while now, but GNU Radio is something that's near and dear to me, something I worked on throughout graduate school. And with GNU Radio, I learned a lot of practical DSP and wireless things, often simply by looking at the code. A lot of the materials out at that time, there was not too much for me to get my hands on, so I'm always thankful to be able to come here to try to contribute to this community because I felt like I learned so much just from one piece of software in terms of my own career. And so today I'm going to share a little bit about a problem called blind source separation. So today it's not going to be fundamentally like new algorithms for this problem. Some of the algorithms I'll be presenting actually have been presented by our very own Josh Mormon for a very specific use case. So today I'll be kind of like going through how I implemented these things actually in GNU Radio, some of the things that are actually limited there, some of the lessons that I learned along the way. And this was all coming out of a kind of desire that to have an out-of-tree module that actually deals with this problem of blind source separation. There's so many techniques that are out there. Scikit-learn is one of the more popular ones. It has different kinds of source separation techniques, but they're very much tailored towards data science and machine learning, which is, has its certain uniqueness to it, but we actually want to use it for the kinds of signals that we're interested in. Okay, so I'll kind of give an outline if you don't already know what the problem is that blind source separation actually solves. I'll talk about some of the common techniques, what makes them unique from each other, what kinds of difficulties you'll have in trying to implement them, and then talk about an algorithm much more in detail, adaptive event processing, why it can work, and then also trying to use a libtorch inside of GNU Radio, which is a C++ backend for the very popular PyTorch module in Python. Okay, so what is the cocktail party problem? Okay, so cocktail party problem is, as it's called, you're in a room, everybody is talking, but the challenge is how can I pick out that one person's voice or that one signal that I actually care about and use it appropriately? So mathematically, what this actually looks like is you have a bunch of sources that you do not know ahead of time. They're all playing at once, and by being propagated through the environment, they get mixed in a linear way. That's what we're going to assume. And you get collections of those mixtures at different sensors, right? In the case of an actual cocktail party, these would be microphones. All these microphones are collecting a bunch of different voices, and they are mixed linearly without you actually knowing what is being sent, who is speaking, what they're saying, so on and so forth. So how do we actually solve this problem? This is what all of these blind source separation techniques are designed to tackle. Okay, so and the challenge here is that there actually are, if you look at the simple equation there, x equals a s of t, there are numerous solutions to this. They're actually not unique, right? You can just take all of your sensors, and any unmixing matrix that you apply, somehow can be a valid solution. So the issue at hand is, how do we actually find a solution to this problem that gives me signals that are actually interesting, that actually correspond to what I'm actually looking for? Okay, so we'll talk about a couple of these problems, or a couple of these solutions, one at a time. So all of these blind source separation techniques, they all operate in a similar way. You need some assumption to actually make this unmixing produce signals that are useful to you. You need to make some assumptions on the kinds of signals that were actually sent, or you need to make some restrictions on that corresponds to some restriction on the signals that you actually received as well. And so oftentimes these result in some kind of optimization problem. Okay, so the first one I'll talk about is principal component analysis. I'm sure many of you guys are actually very familiar with this kind of thing. So how does PCA work? It assumes that all of the original signals that I was looking at, we want to assume that the original signals I care about are somehow linearly correlated at the lowest possible level, right? And so how we can do that is we can use eigendecomposition. This will give you the values that you want. Now, how is this used in practice? There's many different places. The place that I'm most familiar with is in machine learning. So in machine learning, you typically have a feature vector. You probably decided that this feature vector needed to be arbitrarily large, thousands of elements wide. But then what you're looking for is how many actual dimensions are useful inside this thousands or tens of thousands element feature vector. So principal component analysis is very good at finding the linear combination of all of these features that you are trying to learn on, and trying to reduce it to where there are a set of features that account for the most variance inside of all of that variance that you're observing. So this is very useful. You often see this in machine learning, having thousand element feature vectors getting projected onto a two-dimensional space, and you see kind of two classes get separated. So PCA is kind of helpful for this kind of thing. But it also works in other kinds of signal capturing scenarios. Let's say that you're actually trying to capture a signal for which you cannot improve the signal to noise ratio through like regular means, right? Something you're trying to observe potentially underground, like you may not be able to just magically improve your power, but you can actually increase the number of sensors. So if you can keep observing the same phenomena, even if you have some limited SINR, then you can just throw a bunch of sensors at it. PCA is one of the such techniques that can actually help you to pull out the signal you're interested in. Okay, so this is a very trivial example of that. Let's say I have a bunch of sinusoids. They all have various different amounts of noise and different phase. PCA can figure out, okay, how should I combine these such that I get something cleaner at the end, the actual signal that I want. Okay, so how this would actually be implemented in reality. So this is how I put it inside of a GNU radio block using an accelerated math library called Armadillo. So what you'll often see when you try to put something in a GNU radio block, there's always the steps of like copying it in and out of the GNU radio buffers. If your library permits it, or if you have the time, you can make it so that you just do the operation inside the buffer and then maybe do that one last copy at the end. But that's not what this shows here. But the actual math, that's actually what you see here at the top, and at the bottom, that's just copying in and out of various GNU radio buffers. And then the rest of the math is doing eigenvalue decomposition, finding the eigenvector that corresponds to the maximum eigenvalue, projecting, and then you get basically the linear combination of what came in such that the, accounts for the most variance. Okay, so to actually test something like this is a GNU radio flow graph that you can construct. It's actually in the code that will be, that's actually in the GitHub repo. So you just have a bunch of sinusoids, they add the noise, and you run something like this. This will run in real time, and you can see how PCA can be used in a very simple way to combine these kinds of things. So you'll see here at the top these sinusoids that are out of phase, and then combined together there using that code that you just saw, as well as some torch code that you actually will see, torch code that we'll talk about later. Okay, that's PCA. So that only works so well, and in fact, many situations in wireless signals does not work very well. But independent component analysis, which is another technique, which is very popular across many different fields, it actually tries to assume that the sources themselves are statistically independent. So another way to think about it is PCA is only linear correlation, right? But then ICA tries to go to higher orders of correlation that we want to remove. Another way you can think about it is that we want to assume that the sources are non-Gaussian. If I have a bunch of microphones and they're literally listening to a bunch of Gaussian noise, there's probably nothing of interest there. So it's a pretty good assumption in a lot of situations. So then if I can try to separate out the signals, assuming that there must be a mixture of non-Gaussian signals in there, what I can do is try to find a weighting of the input signals such that the Gaussianity, which can be measured in different ways, is maximized through a kind of optimization procedure. Okay, this actually works pretty well and actually doesn't have many of the pitfalls of PCA. It's a little bit computationally heavier than PCA as well, but it actually has been used in practice. It can be used as one form of adaptive beamforming, channel estimation, and other things as well, because it actually works reasonably well. Okay, so just giving you an illustrative example of what this looks like. At the top left here, you have 3 different signals, a sinusoid, a chirp, and a sawtooth. At the top right, if you randomly mix them, you'll get something like this, right? This is the blind source separation problem. How do I separate 3 different signals just looking at that top right there, right? You might be able to tell that, okay, maybe there's some kind of sawtooth and some kind of periodic signals in there, but then could you just on your own try to separate them? Well, what ICA does is there at the bottom, it's actually pretty good at separating them. You'll see the sawtooth, you'll see the sinusoid with a little bit of jagged edges in there, and also the chirp. So ICA is pretty good. Right? It actually will actually get you somewhere if you try to just use it off the shelf. But you will notice something that I will highlight a little bit later. The difference between the top left and that bottom middle figure there, right? The sawtooth they're in different places, right? So I'll highlight why that is. Okay, the math, again, in the actual implementation, GNU Radio is very similar. You have to do similar things that you do for all of these accelerated math libraries. You have to do the copying in and out of GNU Radio buffers at a very least. If you're going to deal with matrices, which I heard and still hope that that's a thing in 4.0, that matrices might become like a native type, that would be fantastic. But then, yes, trying to get this into a matrix form so I can do some linear algebra. What ICA does that's a little bit heavier than PCA is it first whitens the signals itself, and then after that, it basically uses a nonlinear function, right? In this case, it's a hyperbolic tangent, to basically measure the Gaussianity, right? The output of this hyperbolic tangent, we're going to say that's the measure of Gaussianity. So using a basic optimization procedure that's iterative, basically try to extract out as many non-Gaussian signals as I possibly can from this mixture, and then output that to the GNU Radio buffer. Okay, so a way you can do this, right, in GNU Radio, I put this inside of a block. You can take 3 different sources. These aren't just sinusoids this time. Multiply them by a random matrix, and then try to separate them in ICA. So if you do that, what you're going to get is something like this. Let's see if this video will play. I just want you guys to see kind of what ends up happening. It's going to look kind of funny, I imagine. Okay, I think that you could kind of barely see what happened there. But so a couple of things that I want to highlight, actually you could see it in the other figures. Okay, one is you might see the colors change as the flow graph is running, and also you might see the relative amplitudes and how well it unmixes actually kind of change over time. So this is one of the big downsides of ICAs and other blind source separation techniques, is that the order in which things come out is not deterministic, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And also, it just doesn't always separate that well, and there's a couple of reasons for that as well. Okay, so the pitfalls of ICA and PCA and other blind source separation techniques like non-negative matrix factorization, just in their vanilla forms, they tend to not play nicely with complex signals, which we all tend to really like and understand very well, and they're very useful in practice. So just using them as they are, you're going to need some significant modification, which you can totally do, and there are existing implementations out there. I certainly would like to have them in a library like this. Okay, well, the other thing that PCA and ICA doesn't typically handle is like, what if I don't know how many sources there were to begin with? But also, like, let's say I actually want to demodulate or actually analyze these signals. If it's done on a block-by-block basis, if the order in which their output is not deterministic, how do I write an algorithm that actually can process, every 64 samples I'm dealing with one of the signals, but I don't know which one, right? So this can be an issue with almost all the blind source separation techniques, because if you look at the math, actually it still satisfies the equations as long as and it satisfies the constraints even under certain permutations inside that equation. Okay, so now I want to talk about one that I would say is much more practical for wireless signals, solve some of these problems and just get into the details of this algorithm. It's actually a relatively simple algorithm, I hope to understand, that can be much more useful for a lot of applications out there. Okay, so adaptive event processing. Instead of assuming some kind of relationship between the signals that are generated, let's say there's some kind of relationship between what I observe now and I observe later. Like trying to take that constraint into account and then try to separate the signals based off of that, right? The idea here is quite simple, is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a certain amount of samples in the past across multiple apertures, and I will calculate the covariance, right? This is what almost all these BSS techniques do. This is going to give me some kind of sense for how these signals are currently at this time or in the past, either way you think about it, are related to each other. You can just ignore subsamples if you want inside the algorithm, and then I will take a new set of samples and calculate the same thing. So we have this covariance in the past, and we have this covariance right now, which we will call spatial signatures. Right? This covariance is ultimately as a result of where these sources are placed in the environment and how they relate to all the sensors are actually kind of being given a spatial signature based off of where they are placed as well. Okay, so let's say we actually want to do blind source separation. The first thing that we can do is we can detect whether there's a change. If there's the correlation between now and in the past is the same, then nothing has changed. I have not found a new signal, there's nothing for me to do, and I can detect what that is by looking at the relationship between this old covariance and this new covariance. More specifically, if I want to build a very sensitive detector to something like this, is if I take that matrix A, which is the inverse of the old covariance multiplied by the new covariance, you do eigenvalue decomposition on this, you take the largest eigenvalue. That eigenvalue will tell you whether something has changed between now and then. Okay, so already you can kind of imagine there's a lot of wireless events, right? There's a lot of wireless situations where something is going to turn on at a specific time, it's going to turn off at a specific time, and if you know that with some regularity, then you can use this to either ignore that change because you know when it's going to happen, or highlight it all the more. Okay, because using this highest eigenvalue, you can take the eigenvector that corresponds to that, you weight what is actually, you weight the incoming samples with that, and now you have a set of weights which will highlight just that new signal as much as possible. Okay, so if that signal can be separated, you'll get something very clean and nice at that time. However, just because you get that value doesn't mean they're going to be easily separated at that point. Okay, so just one other thing that's actually also important for this and other techniques is that this all only works in a narrow band sense, right? So if your frequency response is not flat, then this is not going to work. However, you can make it relatively flat by channelizing the input, running this algorithm across all of those channels and then doing something like that, right? This is something that's employed in a lot of different wireless techniques. Okay, so what this looks like in practice, here on the left, you'll see what looks like a bunch of apertures which have received something like band-limited noise. You cannot see any discernible signals inside of those spectrums. Maybe you can, I certainly cannot. But then here on the right is the output of AEP, right? AEP has just scanned this plot of spectrum and said, oh, I found a change here, apply this eigenvector on that to weight all of these, and bam, you kind of find this chirp that was sitting there under all of this noise. Now, AEP doesn't have to be applied in the context of a phased array. However, if you do have a phased array, and this does apply to a phased array, then you can interpret its weights as a kind of steering vector. And so what you'll see here on the right is this is the beam that gets formed out of those weights. So it's actually, basically doing adaptive beamforming by just finding the last thing that showed up in this way. Okay, but again, it does not have to be applied to a uniform linear array. It's just any mixture, it can actually separate out pretty well. Okay, so what this looks like using the Armadillo library, again, is similar to the others. I still need to handle this copying in and copying out of buffers. And then after that, doing the eigenvalue, or doing the matrix multiplication, inversion, eigenvalue decomposition, so on and so forth, and then applying those weights if you actually detect a new signal. If you do not detect a new signal, you do not need to apply this algorithm, which is one of the reasons why this is actually even very efficient in practice, is because you can either ignore changes that you don't really care about, so you can do this only so often, whereas for like PCA, ICA, you're kind of always recalculating, okay, how do I unmix this signal, how do I unmix this signal, so on and so forth. All right, so that's a couple of the algorithms out there for blind source separation. There's a bunch of them out there, and there's a lot of different implementations and tweaks to these, which will work with complex signals, which will work with unknown amounts of sources, which are combined with other techniques to be able to solve this problem. But this is kind of just the start of an out-of-tree module that has hopefully some things that are more drop-in, can be useful for different things, and so on and so forth. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is how to actually implement these same algorithms with libtorch. Okay, so libtorch is the C++ interface, right, or the C++ library that is used actually behind the scenes for PyTorch. So now, instead of working with vectors in Armadillo, I get to work with tensors natively in C++, which is really nice because those tensors can live on the CPU, they can live in your GPU, they can live in multiple GPUs, they can live in other devices that libtorch supports in that environment. I don't think they support all the devices in that same environment, but quite a lot of them. So as long as you can get it to work with one version of libtorch, then you kind of get this free implementation for other devices. So, and even the CPU implementation does use something like OpenMP, which doesn't always help you, but it's nice to have the option to actually have there as well. Okay, so why do we want this? As I mentioned, we want to be able to try to run these on GPU. If you look at the algorithms closely enough, they certainly lend themselves to parallelization, so one would hope putting it on the GPU would actually accelerate things, but as anyone has tried to put things on the GPU, it's not that simple. There's a couple of things that you have to consider for you to actually get the full benefit out of that card. Other things is, having another implementation of CPU is also useful for a number of different reasons. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can put this on a GPU. This is not the fastest way, but again, libtorch itself brings some flexibility with it. That's why we wanted to try to do that. Also because, having libtorch can enable other kinds of applications like you would use in machine learning with deep neural networks. Okay, so some of the challenges that I faced in trying to actually use libtorch in GNU Radio. First of all, trying to adjust the CMake to where you can actually use torch tensors inside of inside of a GNU Radio block was quite difficult because they use different versions of libraries. And these are like very common libraries. And so if you've ever done CMake, sometimes just calling find packages, these CMakes that other developers write, they kind of change various variables. And then when you try to use the same variable when you're trying to compile GNU Radio. It doesn't work the way you expect. So you have to make some adjustments with CMake, trying to isolate those two environments so that things will compile. And one of the things I spent some time on, a feature that I wanted to really play with, was using this idea of dev containers. So in the repository, you'll see a Docker file in there, which will be just another form of how did I get this to work in GNU Radio, right? It's not going to fully reproduce the exact same environment because GPUs need to be there's some other things you need to do to get GPUs to work inside containers, but at least that gives a better clue of how to actually set up your environment to get this to work. Okay, other challenges I face is that it's not as simple like drop-in replacement with Armadillo. The API calls are different, and the linear algebra is different. They don't have all the same linear algebra operations implemented, and they don't have the same options as well. Armadillo is actually highly optimized for linear algebra on the CPU. You have much more control over it. PyTorch is just simply not going to have, for its purposes, a need to optimize down to that level. So if you want to do it, you have to do it yourself. So there's a lot of challenges in making that happen, but in the end, it's kind of nice to have that as a part of a GNU Radio block. Okay, so wrapping up here pretty quickly. So all I did was, after implementing this with libtorch, I just measured it as it was, right? There's definitely more optimization to do. In fact, you'll see some of the numbers on here can be rather disappointing. Even though it's running on the GPU, you try to maximize as much data as you can shove into the GPU at one time, but still there is the transfer from the CPU to the GPU, right? If you don't make that asynchronous, then you're going to lose some runtime there. So there's plenty of work to be done. I don't think they're going to be complicated things, but nonetheless, the work is there. So for PCA, it already runs pretty fast with Armadillo. With Torch, a little bit slower on the CPU than even just Armadillo, but the GPU is mega slow. All right, so that's unfortunate, but I'm sure there's some adjustments that you can do there. Same thing for ICA and same thing for AEP. Okay, so these are kind of the initial implementations for some of the blind source separation techniques. There are a whole host of things out there to try to implement, and definitely some work to be done in terms of optimization. Okay, so that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening, and take any questions.
What questions do we have for Garrett?
I'll throw one. Is there a place you can find the repository?
Is there what?
Open source code.
Yeah.
There it is. That's tiny text. I can see it
now.
now.
Oh, yeah. It's big to me up here, but yes, GitHub, gvanhoy/GRBSS.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hi, I enjoyed your presentation. So the place where you were talking about in the ICA, or sorry, no, the, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, adaptive event processing. And where you were looking at all of those different spectrograms that were used, and then it ended up coming out with a beamforming, sort of a beamforming vector at the end. Could you explain a little bit more what that vector represents, and like how you might be able to use the angle that produces in the abstract space?
Okay. So I guess I'll kind of start from the beginning a little bit to explain at least the beginning of this figure. So again, what you're seeing here on the left is, you could think 36 apertures, and they're all just staring at a spectrum, and what they're looking at through their apertures is basically band-limited noise. That's what you're looking at. There is a signal buried in there, right? But the spectrogram and the coloration on it, you can't see it. If you can, yeah, I'm always hesitant to say it because I'm colorblind, but maybe there's like some other color in there that I can't see, but I'm pretty sure it's not there. It's pretty deeply buried in the noise there. So that's there, and so what's happening is that the AEP algorithm is basically, it just scans across that entire area looking for changes, right? It's basically, I don't know if you can see my mouse. So it's going to look, you cannot see my mouse? I don't think you can. Okay, oh yeah, you can. So here on the left side of the output spectrogram, what you can think is, as it's comparing the covariance from this little time slice to the next time slice, it's saying it's still uncorrelated because all this is a white noise. It's not correlated spatially at all. And so the detector is saying, I don't need to do any kind of weighting of any of the input vectors. But then once it gets to about halfway, when it compares the covariance here in the middle to a little bit to the right, it says, hey, the covariance has changed. There is now a spatial signature on the signal that was not there before. So let's do the math, figure out what direction is that spatial variance, or that spatial signature changing, and then weight all 36 of these by that vector. Once you do that, then you get this nice kind of clean output. Now, AEP normally works kind of like, it measures it and then applies it and then the output is changed. But in this case, I kind of applied it retroactively. I got a whole bucket of IQ data. I applied it across the whole thing, found the highest eigenvalue, and then applied it again across the whole thing. So it kind of like cheated by going back in time, but more for illustrative purposes. Because usually when something shows up, it usually doesn't just show up just once. It kind of sticks around. So then it would be nice and clean after that. Okay, so the thing that you're looking at on the right is if you actually take that eigenvector that came out that you weighted it by, if you assume that you have a uniform linear array, right, that allows you to actually determine what the beam pattern actually looks like, and that's plotted here. So this is clearly telling you that this signal came at 30 degrees from the relative how my ULA was actually placed. So it also tells you, yeah, anyway, that's what that means. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, excuse me. Let's do one more round of applause for Garrett. We have our morning break coming up. We're Okay, we're good. We'll start back up at 10:30. So.
Hello everyone, my name is Pedro, and together with Martin, we are going to talk about the reception of GoAssist satellite services, HRIT and GRB. This work was done in collaboration with the Universidad de la República and the professors Gonzalo Belcredi, Gonzalo Gutiérrez, and Federico Larroca. Before starting with the presentation, I'm going to do a brief summary of the contents. First, we're going to talk about a brief introduction about the GoAssist satellites and the materials we use for this work. Then we are going to talk about in detail about the HRIT reception and GRB. And finally, we're going to talk about the conclusions and possible future work. To start up, probably most of you know what the GoAssist satellites are, but they are operated by the NOAA. They are meteorological geostationary satellites, and they provide continuous monitoring of Earth's atmosphere, oceans, and environment. Currently, there are two active satellites, GoAssist East and GoAssist West. And as you can see on the image on the top, GoAssist East satellite footprint covers most of the American continent, including North, South, and Central America. So this is a satellite we currently focus our work on. There are three main ways of accessing the GoAssist data. First, you can access it via the internet using something like Amazon Web Services. You can also receive some rebroadcasts from other satellites, for example, using GeoNetcast. And finally, you can receive the data directly from the satellite using the two services that they provide, HRIT and GRB. For the materials we use for the reception systems, both systems were SDR-based. Most of you know the advantages that this type of technology brings on. But for us, we wanted a flexible and cost-effective alternative to the traditional proprietary systems that most satellite reception systems actually rely on. For the software, we used SatDoom, which is an open source free software for satellite data processing. And apart from being compatible with a lot of SDRs, it also has support for several satellite services, including HRIT and GRB. Starting on with the reception systems, high rate information, or HRIT by its signals, it provides an accessible alert and forecasting with model reception requirements, and it transmits a limited subset of products compared to what the satellite actually captures, and at an even lower spatial resolution that GRB does. For the signal characteristics, it uses a vertical polarization, and it's located in the L-band frequency. It uses a bandwidth of 1.2 megahertz and uses a constellation scheme of BPSK. The reception system we implemented is shown on the right. We use a repurposed Wi-Fi antenna with which we modify its dipole length to actually match the operating frequency of the HRIT signal. We also added a balloon because we had some problems with the common mode current, and the balloon actually solved that problem. We also use an LNA and bandpass filter. For that, we use NoLX Sober Plus, which actually implements both equipment in one little box. And for the SDR, we use an Adam Pluto. The link margin was estimated to be at around 0.39 dBs, which, although being pretty low, it was actually enough to receive all the data without any errors. On the left, you can see SatDoom's UI, and on the left of that image, you can see the constellation that we received. Despite being pretty noisy, thanks to HRIT's error correcting capabilities, the image that we received was actually error-free. And on the right, you can see a product of that SatDoom generated using the channels transmitted by HRIT. This is a false color image of the Earth.
All right, so moving on, this part involved receiving the GRB service, which stands for GOES Rebroadcast. This means that it delivers the full GoAssist dataset, including all of its images. And it's also meant mostly for institutional use, which means that it requires more complex infrastructure than in the case of HRIT. So that's why the picture that we show, it has a much larger antenna. The GRB signal uses a much higher bandwidth, but also we highlight that it uses the DVB-S2 standard, which is a widely adopted broadcast standard. And the antenna we used was lent to us by Antel, which is Uruguay's state-owned telecommunications company. And we also used the same LNA as in the case of HRIT and custom-built septum feed, as well as an USRP B200 Mini, and we ran as well SatDump on a laptop to decode the data. The big difference between GRB and HRIT, aside from the data rate and the broadcast, is the signal characteristic. It's broadcast with two opposite signals with opposite polarization, with one with left hand and the other with right hand. So we needed an antenna feed capable of receiving both at the same time. That's where the septum feed comes in. By construction, it's able to separate polarizations and enable us to receive both at the same time with the same antenna. But the one we built had some slight issues at the beginning, mostly with the symmetry of its structure. It needs to be perfectly square, and ours wasn't, which meant that our performance wasn't good enough. Therefore, we had to fix that, as well as the polarizer, which is this ladder-like structure inside of it. We had to have a precise alignment of it in order for it to work. The reception we had initially, after the septum feed successfully worked, had a very low SNR, which had to do with the fact that we were using a faulty power supply for the RNA. As the bottom left image shows, there was an irregular noise floor. We changed that source, and suddenly the system was fully working. The spectrograms we show on the right are the right hand and left hand signals we received. These are the results we had. Again, the SatDump UI showing the QPSK constellation from the DVB-S2 broadcast used for GRB. There's a composite image, and there's also some extra data, which is broadcast by the service, which is an image of the surface of the sun. So, to end, the first thing is that we demonstrated that it's possible to receive these services which have meteorological applications with SDR-based solutions. We believe that the HRE system is far more simple, which makes it suitable for introductory educational courses. And for the GRV system, we mostly believe our implementation is a proof of concept, which would definitely need more work in order for it to be usable in institutional use cases. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys. What questions do we have? Yeah.
What was your approach for debugging your antenna feed?
It took a lot of time, mostly because we were also learning in the process, but we mostly wanted to see what could be wrong, because we felt that what we had built was okay with the design we had made. So we started looking for differences. The first thing that came to our mind was the fact that it wasn't completely symmetrical, which it had to be, and we started making changes and seeing if that would improve the performance.
Did you have some test equipment? How did you characterize the results so you could improve it?
We use VNA that's available at our university.
Great. Any other questions? So for the first satellite, I'll let you ask a question.
What was the SINR that you observed after you made the fixes?
Sorry?
What's the SINR you observed after you made the fixes?
The thing is that prior to making the fixes, we weren't receiving anything, so we didn't really make any measurement.
And what about after?
The SNR was, I think, 9, almost 10 dBs.
So I'm curious. I've got a teenager at home. For the first project, is that something that you think that a teenager could do with the hardware and equipment set up?
Most definitely, yes.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. One more round of applause. All right, our next speaker is Dan Boshin.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? So happy to be here again. So yeah, I'm Dan Boshin, and I teach online courses for signal processing related to wireless communications and software radio. And in doing that, my courses are mostly using Python and post-simulation activities to show and demonstrate the waveforms and things like that we're talking about. And there's been a desire from my students for some real-time hardware experience in doing that. So with that, I've been looking for a platform, and to describe what I'm looking for first, I'm looking for something real-time and portable that has dual transmit and receive capabilities. These are the things that will fit in with the material I have, that can implement waveforms anywhere from 0.1 megahertz to 20 gigahertz with over-the-air communication, with no regulatory concerns, and have up to maybe a gigahertz of instantaneous bandwidth, right? So that would be the ideal. And the courses I have, they're very low cost. They're set up to be accessible to an international audience. And so I want all that for less than $50. So that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm hoping to find. So this came out of that. SIGPro Labs, that refers to this project we're doing with my partner, Jamie Mitchell, and we're calling ourselves SIGPro Labs, and this platform, Radiosonic. This is all new. I'm excited to talk about it with you here. I'm looking for feedback on this and some potential partners in what we're doing, notably university professors. So if there's any university professors in this audience, I'm hoping to talk to you more. So what it is, so this Radiosonic platform, it's a software-defined radio teaching platform that's emulating wavelength consistent wireless signals. So the thing we're doing is we're scaling the speed of light to the speed of sound to be able to implement all those waveforms I described in a wavelength consistent manner. All right, so we're doing everything in the acoustic domain in terms of all of the digital processing you would do in a software radio. So this isn't an acoustic or audio modem in any sort. It's doing everything you would do in a software radio, scaled down to the speed of sound. So it's going to be applicable to all the things you would have to do in terms of what you're dealing with multipath and fading and carrier recovery and timing recovery with all the common waveforms in those frequency bands. And on top of that, it's also useful for just introductory signal processing education, like filters, FIR filters, IR filters, and things like that. That's also a very big part of my courses. So what we're not, there are already audio to, doing RF and audio band solutions out there. Here are two of them, CASM and Maxim. They have these websites I show are excellent in terms of signal processing education, and CASM puts out some very good courses as well. So they have solutions that do it that are still post-processing. So what we think is novel here is doing it on a standalone platform for those that want that real hands-on actual hardware experience of implementing something that stands alone and operates and works as a radio without any tethered computer to it. And so that's what this Radiosonic platform is. It's combining this very low-cost hardware, and they show the main features here. It's based on, we're focusing on using the SP32 room as it's a Wi-Fi Bluetooth SoC module that has dual-core 240 megahertz processor with hardware acceleration for signal processing, combines Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and we'll connect that together with an audio codec, 24-bit dual ADC and DAC for the full solution. And microphones spaced a quarter wavelength apart, can do beam forming and beam steering solutions as well. And so we'll combine that. The idea is combining it with software, so ready-to-go software that has the interfaces all worked out, common interfaces, so there isn't custom coding, but it's extendable and allows for extensions with ready-to-go course materials as a solution to university curriculums in this area. So hands-on DSP wireless with very low hardware costs. This would be the features where this would fit in well. Signal processing, software-defined radio courses, communication, wireless systems, both at the undergraduate and graduate level to different levels. It can be very simple features, simple things as FIR filtering, to more complicated features like OFDM. And the idea is we would provide all the framework, so this would be ready to go and fall right into existing courses without the need for an additional lab or anything like that, and low cost enough that students will be able to have that take it home with them experience. So this is showing what the core platform could look like in terms of what you're seeing here is having the DMA transfer. This would be one channel out of the 2 audio channels, so you're getting this 24-bit ADC with your 100 dB dynamic range plus and DMA transfer going through, having that all worked out so that the data can stream through from the ADC to the DAC, also a 24-bit DAC, and in between you can implement the digital filters, multi-rate processing equalization, et cetera, and waveforms such as simple waveforms like BPSK and QPSK, or something more complicated with FFT processing like OFDM. And can have like the digital down converter, so all the things you would see in a software radio would be in here, and that's what's distinguishing it very much from just being an audio modem, where you're having digital down converters and then custom waveform processing, digital up converters. Any of these things here can be part of the framework, so you're plugging in something unique to it that's specific to the particular lesson, or it could be the lesson itself, like a digital down converter showing an NCO combined with filtering. And notably, this is how you would do it in a real radio working up at gigahertz speeds. So I like this example to make the case for this. There I'm just showing a bunch of spectrums there, but I'm talking about Wi-Fi 7 operating up in the 5 gigahertz band with 160 megahertz of bandwidth, right, in terms of that, and a 2,000 bin FFT and all this processing and everything we would do. And there's great interest in being able to see that firsthand and go through and implement it stage by stage, and that very much could be part of this. Once you scale it from the speed of light to the speed of sound, the 5 gigahertz band ends up being a slice at 6 kilohertz, right? And that 160 megahertz of bandwidth is only 182 hertz wide, right? So it's really, really slow symbol rate. So the idea here isn't to make a high-speed, high-bandwidth modem, like an audio modem. It's to emulate exactly the waveforms that you would see up at 5 gigahertz. And this is showing, you know, what would that do? You could have the 6 kilohertz coming in to the same digital down converter structure you would use up at 5 gigahertz. You could have all the rate conversion and then your complex baseband on this very, very slow rate. And this is showing the delay spread, or the frequency selective fading you would see across that band in terms of demonstrating very much how it's an opportunity to show or motivate why are we using OFDM in terms of dealing with this aggressive fading environment and how it converts frequency selective fading like this into flat fading in terms of each subcarrier being a very narrow portion of that. So it's all the same thing. As far as the major reflections off the objects in the room, acoustically you would see the same thing in the audio waveform itself. And this is just showing a demo I previously did and just showing how the anticipated lesson plans can be focused on being fun for the students in terms of it's a demo I did where I converted tone petty, which, and we're looking for someone more relatable to 20-year-olds, but my partner came up with tonal swift, so it might be tonal swift getting converted to Taylor Swift. But this was neat, where I took 1 kilohertz tone and superimposed it on a sound clip of Tom Petty, who I miss, and you pass it into this nice little tiny platform that's taking audio in and audio out and streaming it, and in there is a very simple notch filter, but very good in terms of very sharp, and you listen to it in real time, you hear it convert tone petty into Tom Petty, which is beautiful. So that's it. It's the Radiosonic platform. We're working on it. This is the ideal time. We're about to decide what the real features on this would be. What does it need to be? We're trying to stay well under that $50 price point. That's the only constraint we have. And we're interested in hearing more. We do have, so UMass Lowell is definitely signed up to be interested. We're working with them on incorporating it into their curriculum, and we're looking for maybe 2 more professors that would really be engaged and interested in having this. We would be doing all the work under their advisement in terms of making sure this is going to be successful, and our interest is to get it used in the college curriculums, and my personal interest is I'm going to be a big customer. It's just that myself alone won't justify going through this effort, so if we have more interest collectively, then this will make sense for us to create this platform. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dan. What questions do we have?
Thanks. So you showed a plot of a typical room response function, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm kind of in the worst possible spot.
No, that's okay.
What about
voice?
You mentioned OFDM. What about the coherency time of the channel? Is this going to be a problem for if you scale down the RF to, like, you wouldn't do the same number of subcarriers, or you would have to do the same number of subcarriers?
It would be the same number of subcarriers. So the real challenge that I have to discover is the other end of the spectrum. So it's easy. These subcarrier spacings are going to be less than a hertz. They're very narrow. So the waveform, what's going to be different, one things that are different is Doppler will be different, but I can demonstrate that actually more easily by demonstrating, but that scales differently. But the waveforms scale consistently so that if you implement OFDM the same way, you're going to be able to do timing recovery, carrier recovery, deal with the multipath, that sort of thing very similarly. The interesting challenge will be time, right? So in terms of what the accuracy of time is, you're slowing down the symbol rate, so the accuracy of the oscillator. Will the oscillator be clean enough to be stable that long, and how will I deal with that? But it's also at a much lower frequency, so that's scaling as well too, but that's something I have to explore in terms of the ability to completely emulate it totally. We may face a constraint on the time quality of the oscillators.
Cool, thanks.
Will you be looking for beta testers?
Yes, we'll be looking for beta testers. Well, certainly, I'll be having this as a course. I'm already developing that tone petty demo you saw is based on a microchip processor, Curiosity Nano eval board I already have. The challenge that I saw is that I'm telling you, okay, you have to buy the eval board, you have to buy all these wires, you have to buy a little proto board, you have to buy the A to D and D to A module and put it together, and then come to class and we'll talk. So I want something ready to go, it's all worked out, and that's where we thought, hey, it could make sense to do this as a standalone platform and have it be widely available.
So you had a pair of microphones spaced?
Yeah. So there's a pair of microphones.
But speakers?
And looking at speakers, so the speakers I would like are very expensive. but they need to be really small, and I'd like so it was like tweeters that could go from 4 kilohertz to 20, but perhaps a speaker that works well in the 5 to 6 kilohertz would be enough to do that. But it's also that SoC we were looking at that has the Bluetooth built in for free, basically. We don't need the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi. It's so cheap. Nice platform, already qualified for FCC and regulations and things like that. So having any Bluetooth headset can be the speakers, right, in terms of that. Not headset, but Bluetooth speakers. But certainly if we find low cost enough speakers, that will work. Yes, those microphones are spaced to be a quarter wavelength apart, up around that 5 to 6 kilohertz part. That quarter inch or so is a quarter wavelength apart. So out of the box, it does the ability to do beam steering, that type of thing. But we're also anticipating the boards to be stackable. So they're also stacked a quarter wave in height, so you can have larger arrays as well, easily implemented.
Well, thank you for your talk. And if I may suggest something, I saw that you were using the ESP32S3, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Bluetooth. As far as I know, it only does BLE, which might not be able to do audio over it.
So yeah, we don't need to do audio. So again, it's not an audio bandwidth, and that's the thing in terms of just to narrow the focus. The goal is wireless, Wi-Fi 7, 5G, OFDM, GPS, anything that's wireless in terms of doing that. Scaled speed of light to speed of sound, so we're only doing very narrow band things. So we don't need high rate, we're not restricted by that. Now, if we find, and we're sizing this platform now to make sure, okay, how many multiply accumulates can you do? It has SIMD in there, it can do FFTs fast, it has a lot of nice features. We're sizing it. As long as we can implement the complete radios we need to do sufficient for these lesson plans, we're there, and it's a great price point. But we're not looking to make broadband audio. We're not looking to do real-time voice across it, anything like that. That would be our equivalent of saying, give me a radio with 20 gigahertz of instantaneous bandwidth, right? We're okay with the gigahertz of instantaneous bandwidth, which is now, a kilohertz. Make sense? Yeah, thanks for the
Hey, Dan.
comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea. Super cool. One thing that I found as I teach...
And you're an ex-professor.
That's right. Maybe I can still be a professor.
Yes.
One thing that I noticed with students is they have a hard time making connections between abstract concepts. So the idea of scaling it down from a hardware standpoint is like, yes, I love that, right? It makes it cheaper. What I fear, though, is they're going to go, oh, that OFDM is different from this OFDM, and they're not going to be able to make those connections.
Yes.
So what mechanisms in the curriculum do you have to try to make that connection between, hey, this is the same here as it is in the higher band?
Right, exactly, and that's a very good point, and that's the motivation for really going wavelength consistent. Once you capture and see the waveforms in there, and I didn't show it enough, but there's still a link to the PC. The idea is to implement and build the waveform step by step, kind of like, I'll come back to this, but to keep it wavelength consistent. So when you capture the waveforms and look at them, it's the exact same as if you captured a waveform at RF. The I and Q is the same, in terms of what it looks like, where it does, and the things you have to deal with. You'll come out of it with the skills of dealing with the RF waveforms the same way, at the same rate, in terms of that. Not to simplify it to audio where it's, okay, this OFDM with 8 bands that's across the whole audio band, or OFDM appropriate to make an audio modem, but to really make it scaled from RF to audio in the same way that you're just changing the vertical axis in terms of time, and it's the exact same waveform with the same concepts. What you're not learning is all the black magic of RF, right? It's not a course on that. It's a course on what do we do in the signal processing to deal with the dirty RF, right? And we'll still see those things.
So as a follow-up, I know you were targeting undergraduate, it seemed like, on this. Do you think it'd be appropriate for like advanced high school students who had an interest in communications or ham radio?
Yeah, that could be really cool too. That's, yeah, in terms of a very, I think something like the Tone Petty demo that I showed you, that it's actually on YouTube with Robert Faranack. He interviewed me, and he coached me when I first described what I could show him when he wanted me to show him something, and he coached me to like dial it way back, and that's described more in terms of what's good for a high school student to do, and that was a good lesson for me. And that was, hey, a very simple digital filter, not going all the way to, for a high school student, maybe something like FM and AM and just some of these introductory concepts of it, or simple BPSK would be a great thing to show on there, and it could certainly do that. You know, GPS would be an awesome one because it's so simple, actually, and relatable.
All right, let's give Dan one more round of applause.
Thank you.
Our next talk is from one of the Google Summer of Code students. So I'll turn over to Daniel Paul.
Hello, can you hear me at the back? Okay, so I will start off by saying tonal Swift makes much more sense because I don't know who Tom Petty is. I'm sorry, controversial statement. So, hello everyone. My name is Daniel Paul, and I'm a GSOC student that has been working on implementing the FDA protocol as an out-of-tree module for GNU Radio under the mentorship of the brilliant and kind people known as Marcus. Please round of applause for Marcus. And Wiley. I think he's somewhere in here. Ah, there we go. In the back over there. So, yeah, so my presentation is going to be on the lessons learned when implementing this module. And yeah, so what is FD8 and why was it created? FD8 stands for Frank Taylor 8 protocol, and Frank Taylor 8, and it's a protocol used primarily by amateur radio people to make contacts in extremely challenging conditions. And because of the crowd that's here today, I don't feel the need to go through the usual explanation of why we do this and what's in it for us. I think we're all pretty sold on the idea that making long-distance contacts is cool. If you disagree, I'm sure there are plenty of amateur radio people in this room who'll take this up with you outside. Anyways, I think you'll find the lead up to FDA creation pretty interesting, so let's start there. So, once upon a time in the ancient world back in 1999, there was the MFSK protocol. This was one of the first protocols that established forward error correction and was designed for keyboard-to-keyboard communication. Around this time, when Dr. Joe Taylor, after getting bored of winning the Nobel Prize, he decided to enter the much more intriguing space of amateur radio. So, in 2001, he created WSJT, introducing the concept of precise time synchronization, so that all stations had to transmit in exact time windows, though it was created for moonbounds. He then created JT65, and this is where he perfected the weak signal decoding using 65 FSK tones and Reed-Solomon error correction. But the critical limitation here was that the minimum contact time was 4 minutes, so adoption of the JT65 was pretty low. And so the next step along was Whisper, and Whisper could work at negative 29 decibels, and this was in fact even lower than what FD8 could do. However, the main problem was this was a beacon-only transmission, so you couldn't have contacts, right? So from there, Dr. Taylor again implemented WSJT-X, and this was a pretty monumental step because this was a revolution. This was like a full suite software with UI and advanced decoding and QSO management. And I think the main contribution of WSJT-X was that it helped amateur radio people get used to the idea of hybrid automation. Now, there's some in the room that will still say this is sacrilege and everything has to be ground up, but I think the idea that human decision-making in the loop where what stations to call and what to transmit, that's decided by us, while automating technical aspects like some timing, frequency accuracy, message formatting, this software made it a lot more palatable. So it was at this point that FD8 was created. So in 2017, Dr. Taylor with Steve Frank developed the FT8 protocol, and this was adopted by the community rapidly. I don't have the graph, but in 2017, in the middle of the year, it was released, and it just spiked in terms of users. So yeah, it was adopted rapidly, and it basically kept those weak signal capabilities of JT65, but made it 3 times faster. So suddenly you had a way to make contacts. So what does a complete FT8 contact actually look like? It follows a very structured 6-step procedure. So first, someone puts out a CQ call, essentially saying, hello, is anyone out there? Then another station responds with a simple hello back. Next comes the signal report exchange, can you hear me? Followed by, yep, pretty well, can you hear me? Then we get confirmation that both sides receive the reports. And finally, we wrap up with goodbyes. We'll see ya. Now, this might seem almost comically brief compared to traditional voice contacts, where you might chat about the weather, your radio setup, or your day. But remember, we're operating in a world where signals are often buried 20 decibels below the noise floor. At those signal levels, you're lucky to get any communication through at all, let alone have a lengthy conversation about your antenna system. And I think that's the beauty of FT8. It takes this essential skeleton of contact, the very minimum amount of information needed for confirming two-way communication, and it makes it possible in conditions so poor you wouldn't even hear a whisper of voice communication. So now let's look at the technical architecture of FT8 to understand exactly how it achieves those remarkable signal capabilities. So FT8 uses 2-layer error detection and correction system. So first off, we have a 14-bit cyclic redundancy check that's appended to the original message. This CRC kind of acts like a digital fingerprint, if you will. Basically, it allows the receiver to detect whether the decoded message contains any errors. If the CRC doesn't match what the receiver calculates, it knows the decode failed and won't display a false message. Then, because again, we're decoding with such a weak signal system, we have yet another error detection step, correction step. And this is where low-density parity checks come in. FT8 uses a 17491 LDPC code, which means that we take those original 91 bits of the payload with the CRC appended, and we encode them into a 974-bit code word. The LBTC algorithm generates 83 additional parity bits using a sparse parity check matrix. So roughly half of our transmitted bits are redundant parity information designed for error correction. The modulation is 8 FSK and with 6.25 hertz tone spacing. This creates minimum shift keying conditions where phase is continuous between symbols. Because with 6.25 hertz over symbol duration 0.16 seconds, each tone completes an integer number of cycles, thus providing our beloved phase continuity and so avoiding spectral scatter. So the transmitted signal has mathematical form S of t, which you can see on the slides, where phi of t is the phase term. The insight here is that the phase term can be written as the integral of the instantaneous frequency deviation, and this is where Gaussian filtering is needed. The mathematical form of this Gaussian smooth pulse is given by the equation on the right. Now, if you look at the figure on the left, though, you'll see the Gaussian smooth frequency deviation pulses with different bandwidth products. FT8 uses BT equals 12, and this parameter basically controls how much smoothing we apply to the frequency transitions. And why does this matter? Because when you compare this to the BT equals 99 case, which is essentially an unfiltered regular pulse like you'd find in JT65, those sharp instantaneous frequency jumps create spectral scatter with energy spreading outside your intended bandwidth. This smoothing in FT8 with BT equals 12 creates a much gentler frequency transition that keeps the signal tightly contained in its allocated spectrum. And this leads to one of the main advantages of FT8, the narrow bandwidth it occupies. The entire signal occupies less than 50 hertz of bandwidth, really maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio, enabling those negative 20 decibel decodes. The other big advantage is the amount of meaning it squeezes out of those 77 bits through the encoding process. The challenge is, how do you make those 77 bits convey everything needed for amateur radio contacts, from basic exchanges to contest? The answer relies on structured message comprehension, designed specifically for amateur radio purposes. FT8 allocates the first 3 bits to specify one of the 8 possible message types that are possible, and this leaves the 74 bits for the actual user information. And this is where things get sophisticated. The encoding of these remaining bits depends entirely on which message type you select, and this is, of course, restricted. So looking at the table, you'll see the brilliance of the system, because let's take a standard message type of 1, which is a typical signal report exchange. Instead of transmitting each character individually, FT8 recognizes this is message type 1 and encodes it using 2 28-bit call signs, followed by a 5-bit signal report field, plus some hashing. And those 28-bit call sign fields aren't just ASCII text. They use a compressed encoding that can represent the vast majority of amateur radio call signs in exactly 28 bits. For standard call signs following ITU patterns, this compression is incredibly efficient. Notice the bit field tags in the rightmost column. C28 for compressed call signs, R5 for 5-bit signal tags, a grid square. So what that helps is like a grid square like EN37, as you see there, doesn't need a full character space that arbitrary text would require. It follows this specific geographic encoding that can be represented with just 15 bits. And that's why FD8 as a system is incredibly efficient for amateur radio's specific communication needs in the weak signal space. In terms of implementation of the encoder side, there were 3 basic steps. The first, the text was converted to BDUs, and this was handled by a message object that does parsing using regex patterns and extracts all the structured data for the encoding. Next, the structured data is encoded with the CRC calculation and LDBC encoding. Also, it's at this step the symbol mapping is done, so we have the sync patterns present there too. And on the right, we see 8 distinct levels and the PSD plot showing the compact 50 hertz bandwidth. So now for some advice from a beginner to fellow newbies, which I feel like is not this crowd, but like maybe someone at home. So you can avoid some of the mistakes I really should have avoided when I first started out. So first and most critically, if you don't start with the right version of GNU Radio and the right version of Python installed, your life gets very complicated very fast. I cannot stress this enough because version mismatches between GNU Radio 3.8 versus 3.10, that is a nightmare. Python versions, their associated dependencies, they're creating debugging nightmares that can consume days at a time. So yeah, just please do your homework up front, confirm everything before you write a single line of code. Python bindings. Okay, using PyBind 11, I'm not the biggest fan of. So I would just recommend, just don't deal with it right up front. Just save it until later you got some momentum going with your C++ core implementation, get your algorithms working, get your signal processing worked out, then tackle the binding layer. I feel like that will save you some of the frustration that comes with that. Your sanity, oh, thank you. Also, CMake configuration files, they'll need some modification as your project goes. Just don't be afraid to dive into those .txt files and just understand what they're doing, you know? There's specific patterns and conventions, and I just recommend learning them early rather than fighting against them, you know? And also porting algorithms into C++ from Fortran. DSP has a lot of these very DSP algorithms that have been implemented in Fortran from previous people. And if you're thinking about bringing them over into C++, instead of like directly translating it line by line, which is not the best approach, just step back and think for a second. Like, what's the C++ way of doing things? And one of the benefits would be you get cleaner and more maintainable code. You can use some of the modern C++ features, and honestly, long-term save a lot of time because that's just a better way to write maintainable code. And finally, really understand the difference between synchronous message streaming and asynchronous PDU messages in GNU Radio, because this concept will solve many problems you'll run into. I think stream processing is great for continuous data flow, but PDU messages give you what you need for messages. And even though I'm not going to go into detail here, I'll say knowing when to use each paradigm is really something that will save you a lot of time down the road. So to all newbies, please learn from my mistakes. But then again, as Marcus's famous piece of advice goes, why read documentation when you can just spend 2 days debugging? So yeah, once again, thank you, Marcus and Miley, for helping me, and thank you everyone for listening, and GRCon for having me.
Thank you. We'll start off with a question.
Hi, Daniel. Great talk. Just a question. Did you know about FT8 before this project? And if so, like, how did you?
Yeah, so I'm also an amateur radio operator, so as part of that, just being in the community, you get familiar with a lot of these, so that's how I ran into FT8 myself.
Great. Other questions?
Thank you for the talk. So you haven't implemented a decoder yet, or what are your future plans from here?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so decoder is the part I'm implementing right now. I'm working through it with Marcus, and yeah, that'll be the next step before publishing.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I will just note, I love the thing that you said of take a step back and think. A lot of times as engineers, we love to do, and sometimes we forget the think part. So one more round of applause for Daniel. For our final talk of the conference, this is going to be a video, and we'll get that queued up and get it started.
Sorry I couldn't be with you in person. My name is. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person. My name is Matt Carrick, and I'm one of the engineers on TorchSig. And I'll talk about a brief history of TorchSig. I'll talk about our most recent release and some of the upcoming plans we have for the future. What is TorchSig? When I think about TorchSig, so what is TorchSig? When I think about TorchSig, I think it's two main things. The first being dataset generation, so the ability to create synthetic data on the fly to train a machine learning model for you. And then I also think about machine learning models. So we have pre-trained models for you, and then you also have the ability to make a custom model on your own. To support those two, we have tutorial notebooks. So these are Jupyter notebooks that help you to understand the software and customize it for your uses. And then last year we released GRCon, this geared spectrum detect block and flow graph for using a machine learning model to do energy detection on a spectrogram. If you're brand new to TorchSig, TorchSig.com is a good place. So if you're brand new to TorchSig, TorchSig.com is a good place to start. It can ultimately you want to get to the GitHub page. This is where all the software is and where the tutorials are, and everything I'm going to talk about today can be found there. One thing you'll see in the near-term future is a breakout of different repositories. Previously, we've had everything located in one big monolithic repository. You'll start to see breakouts with GR Spectrum Detect and potentially other things in the future. We have written a couple papers. We have two foundational papers from 2022. They are a little bit out of date. A lot has changed in the papers since then, but they're good for context and vision, and we still hold to that. We have a paper from 2024 that we produced, that we wrote for last year's GRCon. We also wrote one this year. So if you want a more up-to-date paper, those two are better places to start. We also have some previous talks. Again, the same caveats apply, but they're good for background and contextual information. After a GRCon last year, we released 0.6. This added in a handful of new signals, and then earlier this year in March, we had a near from scratch rewrite. So this was, from the outside looking in, not that different. Some interfaces changed and that kind of thing, but the back end, or really the internals of the software, changed in a significant way. It allows us to do upgrades and add new features much more easily. Last week we released 2.0, which is another big change for us, and it added, this is really the bulk of what I'll talk about today. So it added analog RF impairments, it added custom data sets, the feature everybody's been asking for, and we changed how we do narrowband and wideband data sets. We have 57 different modulators, so I won't read through all these, but we have QAMs and PSKs, we have FSKs, MSKs, all these different families that we generate synthetically for you to train machine learning models with, or whatever you so choose. You can do other things with that data set. And we even go down to an unmodulated carrier tone. So we try and cover a lot of common modulations. When we generate data sets, we do so with IQ arrays. Everything's stored in a NumPy array with IQ values, or complex values, and everything has metadata associated with it. So for example, when you have a time series, an IQ time series, you need to know information about that to train a machine learning model against it. So you need to know things like the sample rate, and if there are multiple signals embedded within that IQ time series, you need to know the signal center frequencies, the center bandwidth, the signal bandwidths, and so on. You can generate data sets synthetically. Or you can use external generated data to train these machine learning models. That's a new feature for 2.0.
We have two categories of transforms, the first being analog RF impairments. So this is
Really, it's modeling RF hardware effects, so nonlinear amplifier compression, phase noise, IQ imbalance, it's things like that. And we also have ML transforms. And I am a DSP person, I'm not an ML engineer, but the engineers I work with that do the ML tell me this is for preparing and conditioning data for improved ML performance. So it helps with model generalizability, and these are things that are not necessarily intended, they wouldn't necessarily be good for you to do in a DSP system, but they make the machine learning work. So switching the INQ, for example, switching the real and imaginary values, or performing a time reversal of time series, or even dropping samples.
We have three pre-trained
models available for you. So even if you don't want to install the software, you can just run this script. It'll download three of these different models for you. Two are for doing energy detection on a wideband spectrogram, and one is really designed for doing narrowband modulation and recognition.
As I mentioned last year, we
created this, or uploaded the GR Spectrum Detect block and flow graph, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on here. You can go back and listen to that talk, which goes into more detail. But the short version is if you install it, it comes up with, by default, with an X310, an Edis Research X310 or X300. That's what it automatically looks for. You can change that if you want to support a different receiver. So last year we demonstrated it with an Edis Research B210. So if you want to switch in another receiver, that should work for you. Just one thing to be aware of if you want to run it. And then you have the Spectrum Detect block here on the right and the Spectrum Plot, both of which are new custom blocks. So when you run this, it'll run in real time, assuming you have a GPU. And it'll ingest all this IQ, generate a spectrogram for you, and it'll start performing energy detection. So this is what this red box is, this bounding box, and it'll provide a timestamp for you. It'll tell you what the center frequency is, it'll estimate that, and it'll also estimate this NB mod, the narrowband modulation. It'll take a guess at what that modulation is. And this is something that still needs improvement. We're aware of that. We're working
more fields available in the JSON for you. So if you want to write this to disk, that's an option in the flow graph or in the block. You can just enable it, and it'll start recording additional fields and data, metadata for you, such as the bandwidth of the signal, start and stop time, and so on. We have a handful of tutorial notebooks. I won't walk through all these, I'll just highlight some important ones. And at the end of the talk, I'll have a link to a Google Colab. So these are some of the notebooks that you can, with a Google account, you can just go through and run these. You don't have to install the software. I will leave them up for maybe a week or two, just so you can give them a shot. The intent is not to support them long term. Ultimately, we want to get you running with the software installed on your machine, but as I mentioned, I'll leave them up for a little bit so you can, as for attendees for the conference, to try them out. The first data set, or sorry, the first notebook I would suggest you running is this Create and Customize Datasets notebook. Really what the notebook does is it helps you understand some of our workflows and how we create data sets, how we customize data sets, define some of the classes. Even if your interest in TorchSig isn't generating synthetic data sets, it's still useful in understanding our workflows and some of our terminology. So I recommend you start here. We have a notebook for training machine learning models for doing energy detection. And one thing to be aware of is these are intended to only run for 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on your system specs. So it's going to run, it'll generate some data, it'll train on that data very quickly, and then produce a model for you. So if you want a very high-performing model, you can update some of these, the training epochs and some of these training parameters. But this is a good place to get you started for training machine learning models in TorchSig. We have a very similar notebook or tutorial for doing modulation recognition. So this will, again, generate some test data, run very quickly, train it, and then produce a machine learning model. If you want a more high-performing model, you need to update some of those training parameters for this one as well. As I mentioned, we wrote and released TorchSig 2.0 last week, so it's still very fresh, and this is a big change for us, and this is the bulk of what I'll talk about today. one of the most major changes and obvious changes when you start working with this new code base is we got rid of, unified, the idea between narrowband and wideband data sets. And so what does that mean? So this picture, the best way to understand this is through the picture. So on the bottom right is a picture of a narrowband data set, or an element from a narrowband data set. So it's one signal, and the signal is large in proportion to the spectrogram. For wideband, it is multiple signals, or potentially multiple signals, and they are all small in proportion to the spectrogram. So to avoid doing redundant code paths and just minimize some of the maintenance and the simplicity in interfacing with the code, we got rid of those. So there's no longer that distinction. There's just one class for doing dataset metadata. And then you would parameterize it there, pass that into TORCIG iterable dataset, and then that generates the data and metadata for you. If you still like the construct for narrowband and wideband, we created YAML files for you, so those are very similar to the ones we used to create. It has some of those parameters listed in there, so you're more than welcome to continue to use those. We added some features in to do dataset customization when you're generating synthetic datasets. Some of these are old, some of these new, but we'll just walk through a handful of them here to help you understand how to do so. So we have a certain number of signals in the spectrogram that you can generate. There's a range for that, a minimum and maximum. There's a range for the minimum and maximum SNR. And then in terms of the actual signals, there's a range for the burst length, so the time duration, and then the range for the bandwidth and the center frequency. So all those can be customized in the data sets. And to highlight how this works, I created an example scenario. So this is doing FM broadcast, simulated FM broadcast. And I have the configuration over here on the left. I won't talk through all the points in here. The idea is that this is in the slide deck, so if you want, you can download it off the GNU Radio conference website and work through it. But the picture over here on the right, looking at the spectrogram, I limit the signals to only doing FM. I limit them to full broadcast. So the duration is 100% of the spectrogram, and they're all relatively narrow bands. That's one example of the flexibility with the dataset generation. I also create something that is 2.4 gigahertz like. It's not exactly like it, but it's more chaotic. There's a lot more co-channel, and it's harder for the machine learning to learn and understand. So this has a greater variation for time duration, the burst lengths, the bandwidths, the center frequencies, and it has a much larger range. It includes all of the 57 different signals in there. When we generate data sets, we have, by default, when we use ranges, we assume it's always distribution. We assume it's always a uniform distribution. If you want to change that, you can, and just a simple test example here is, so for a number of signals, if you have 0 to 3, we assume it's a 25% chance for 0, 1, 2, and 3. If you want to change that, you can do so, and just in the simple example, let's say for number of signals 3, I want a 40% chance. I can have that. This array does not need to sum perfectly to 1. The algorithm internally will balance that for you, so you can use a relative weighting if you prefer as well. By default, unless you change it, we use all of the 57 signals when we generate data sets. If you want to limit that or even change the distribution, you can use class list and class list distribution. So for example, here I have class list, I just have 3 that I've typed into this array or this list. And then as a toy example, let's say I want to generate 16 QAMs 70% of the time, I just enter that into the class list distribution. Because there's 57 different signals, it can be a little difficult to remember what each of the names are spelled and if they have a hyphen or not. So we added in some functions that will return those for you. So AM signals, if you just take this line of code and then you call AM signals, it will return you a list of strings that have all the names. FSK signals will give you all of those signals and so on. So if you'd like to use those, you can call one, you can call multiple and concatenate them as list, or if you want, you can just type in a custom list by hand. So at the bottom here, something of a random list, but 2 GMSK, 32 QAM, and so on. Our previous data sets were indexed, so if you wanted to generate new data, you would say data set of 0, data set of 1, data set of 2, and so on, and that would generate the data and metadata for you. Now we use an iterable data set, so you can use the next operator, and that generates the data and metadata. We also replaced ZAR with HDF5, and one thing we ran into, and it was also the community came back to us, was seems to be a processing slowdown. We think this is fixed, at least in our internal testing. It seems to be faster for large data sets, so be on the lookout for that. If you still have problems, please let us know, but we think this has resolved the issue. We added in a way to prevent but not enforce co-channel interference, and I'll walk through what that means, because it kind of takes some thinking. So I have an example to demonstrate how that works. So you start with this existing spectrogram. So in this case, we've got one signal, this OFDM signal with one bounding box, and you create this. The software, what it does is it randomly generates anywhere in the spectrogram a bounding box. So this is the dotted line here on the right, and it says, okay, did I detect co-channel interference or overlap? And it says yes. So then it goes to an RNG check. And this is what I say, we can act to prevent it. In this case, I say I have my co-channel overlap probability of 0 or 0%. So I say I never want you to allow for co-channel. It hits this RNG check. It always fails because it's 0. And it says, okay, let me find a new location. So the reverse side is we can't enforce co-channel. So the way the code's structured right now, I'm not able to force it to find interference or co-channel interference. So I generate a bounding box here. Same starting scenario, I generate a new bounding box. This solid line, because there's no overlap, it never enters that RNG check. It just stops here and says, okay, I'm stopped. So as I mentioned, we can't enforce it. That's just due to how the code is currently structured right now. We added in 14 new analog RF impairments, and the idea is that these are designed to mimic a real-world transmitter and receiver. I'll just highlight a couple of these. So the list here you have is designed to mimic what we would expect to see for a general transmitter. So you see a quantization effect at the DAC, you see a clock jitter, a clock drift, and so on. You see intermodulation products, a nonlinear amplifier model at the transmit amplifier. Each of these have a certain probability associated with them. So at the top left, quantize is 75%. The ML engineers I work with tell me we don't want these on for 100% because they help with the model generalizability in some way. Having that not enabled to 100% helps the model learn about that effect and isolate some of those effects, and helps with model performance. So this is a transmitter, and then this is the receiver. So this is essentially the same list, just going in reverse. So you start with the low noise amplifier, the LNA. So you see intermod products, nonlinear amplifier effects, and then at the ADC on the other end, you see a quantization, a clock jitter, and a clock drift effect. One change here is we have a DSP effect, not so much hardware impairment, but it does model. If you have a tracking AGC, digital tracking AGC, we still want energy detection and modulation recognition to work under those conditions. So we have a simple model in there for that. We change how we do our RF impairment levels. There's a bit of a code change and also how we handle the different levels. So level 0 only applies ML transforms. When you move to level 1, it adds in the transmitter and receiver impairments, and then level 2 adds in channel models. So right now it is only a fading channel model, but potentially more to come in the future for that. Because we have so many new impairments, and some of these effects are a little hard to understand at first glance, we created a bunch of notebooks for them, and I just call out 3 here. So carrier phase noise, IQ imbalance, and nonlinear amplifier. And what we do for each of these is we have some descriptive text at the top to help you understand what the effect is and what it's doing. And then we run the transform or the impairment, and then we give you a plot. Some of these values that we simulate are a little bit exaggerated. They may or may not be completely realistic. The goal here is really to describe what the effect is. And sometimes to do so, we need to generate a more extreme case so the plot looks good, so you can understand what it's doing. So I hope that makes sense. If you really want to dig into the nitty gritty or understand the details, more realistic settings for some of these, you can go into the code and pull that out. So this is the feature everybody's been asking for, custom data sets. And so we have an initial capability, at least that's what I'm calling it, to read in external generated data sets. It's not fully integrated into our software, more on that in a second. This allows you to use your own data. So if you have your own synthetic data, your own lab data, or your own real world captures, you can now train a machine learning model against that. The caveat or the warning is that it will require you to do some of the legwork on this. So for example, if you want to train a machine learning model against the capture, then you need to tell us what the sample rate is, what the center frequency is for each of the signals in there, the bandwidth for each of these signals, the start time and stop time, and so on. We created two Jupyter notebooks for how to do this. One is for using NPY and one is for using SIG-MF. You are not restricted to only using these two. If you want to use a different file format, you're welcome to. You just need to use these as a guide. One thing to be aware of is you will need to write some code with this. So you can, as I mentioned, you can use it as a guide. You can pull some of the code out of here, but you're going to have to write your own class, write some functions to get this in. One of the limitations in our current implementation for reading in external data sets is we don't have the ability to combine synthetic data sets, so the ones that TorchSig generate, with your own external or custom data sets. That's something we're looking at in the future and resolving. So what's next? So plan for 2.1, as I mentioned, joining external and synthetic data sets for joint ML training, and then we're also looking at updating another round of pre-trained models based on this 2.0 release. And then the final point is, what does the community want? So is there a feature we've not yet considered or something we should consider? Please let us know and we'll take a look. This is the link to the Google Colab page. As I mentioned, it'll be up for a week or two, so everyone here can give TorchSig a shot. But that's it. Thanks for having me, and we will now take any questions.
Okay, we have Matt Carrick, who's one of the contributors to the talk, he's offered to answer any questions. So Matt, if you could come up, and is that okay? Okay. What questions do we have? I have a question. So I recall when TorchSig was originally introduced, and I played around with it some. How valuable for the machine learning based signal processing that you guys are doing, how valuable have you found TorchSig to be? Is this a side project, or is this an integral part of what you guys do?
It's become gradually more integrated into some of our workflows. So I do train a number of machine learning models. And as we've integrated additional transforms that reflect some of the more real world sorts of impairments that you see, it's become very useful for like the augmentations. I mean, the vision for TorchSig has always been, if anybody's done machine learning, you see Torch Vision or Torch Audio have a lot of capabilities that enable machine learning model users, trainers, just somebody who's interested to work with data and have the capability to augment data in a way that facilitates those sorts of mechanisms in that media. So the vision is, as TorchSig has evolved, to provide the transforms, provide the tools to streamline getting people to the level where they can work within the framework that we've got.
Great, thanks. Do we have other questions?
In your experience, how much non-synthetic data do you need to train a model in order to make it work in the real world? Or does it really work with just synthetic data and all the transformations that you do and so on?
How many days do you have? It's a very complicated topic, and it really depends upon your application. If you're doing things like some relatively self-contained classification, modulation, recognition sorts of topics, training on a synthetic data within the realm of like a simulation or modeling can be relatively straightforward. By the time you're getting real-world over-the-air effects with some of these complicated channels, never mind hardware impairments, which we've been moving forward with like some of the new transforms that we've implemented, it becomes a much, much larger goal. And then you have to start trying to create synthetic examples that try to capture the effects that train your model sufficiently. So using them as augmentations in the synthetic realm for the real world data, because often you don't have enough real world data collections in order to realize it. So it's a broad open-ended, and it often means that you're going to have to create a lot of synthetic data that tries to capture the effects that are pertinent to your application.
And is that the way to go, to keep doing synthetic data instead of, let's say, collecting real-world data and then apply it to your data set and so on? Or
right.
What's the workflow that maybe you guys go with?
So often we will pre-train on synthetic data just to bootstrap up a sufficient capability to show that the model works for our application, and then start gradually transitioning to adding more and more real-world data and augmenting the data that we have through data analysis just to have the sorts of effects that are necessary. So it's a hybrid process. You really need the core capabilities of the model to show that it works as part of your initial process of pre-training. But by the time you get to, I want to deploy these models into production or into the real world on real world data, you definitely need multiple iterations of collecting data, updating your models, and then potentially readdressing new synthetic data that has the effects that you need in order to accomplish whatever your goal is, whether it's classification, anomaly detection, any sort of ML process.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Any other? Oh.
Is one of the goals to be able to provide synthetic impairments to real-world data, and what roughly is the number of different types of training sets you want to give to it? Many thousands?
We have a number of data sets which are kind of dependent, whether it's a modulation recognition, or a spectrogram energy detection based, draw a bounding box and do a classification. It's really situation dependent, and those are often hundreds of thousands of examples of a particular class necessary in order to train up the model to the sufficient to distinguish the specific classes in, say, the 57 example modulation categories that we use. And those are often exaggerated when we've got very nuanced differences between classes, as you might in, say, an anomaly detection sort of situation. So you might have to have additional cycles of data generation or updates to the models.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, let's give Matt a round of applause.
So this year's CTF, for me, CTF is always one of the best parts of it. I've heard great feedback from those that participated, heard good feedback from people who were torn between wanting to join the main track and also participate in the CTF. I hear you, and we thought long and hard about ways to deconflict those, but we're still working on finding a smooth way to do that. That being said, I appreciate everybody's patience because as I maybe mentioned before, just decided that I was going to be able to organize this like midway through last week. So we had about 3 working days to kind of pull everything together. So we'll go ahead and talk about, oh, thanks. And it certainly wasn't something I did all on my own, and it was kind of fortuitous timing for me. So next slide. I mean, he's been doing this for years, so a great way to get some wisdom. We wish he had been here. Chuck and Jonathan, also thank you for your help in putting together some parts of the challenge as well. So I'm really thankful for all these people that helped put things together. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. So how did it go? Next, here, we had 52 users, over 41 teams. We had 11 total challenges with a total of 48 possible flags and 2,410 points. We had 51 of those users submit at least one flag. That includes the rules, which was really easy. And at least 45 users moved beyond just the one flag of the rules, which was kind of the gimme. So for me, this is great participation. And then if we look at some of the statistics, we had a lot of people try, and we had some people solve also. So this just gives you an idea of you learn from your failures. As a former professor, I think failure is the best way to learn. Putting your hands on something and realizing what doesn't work is often the best way to learn. When it comes to the different challenges, here's some data in terms of which ones are the most solved. We had one or two that had 0 solves, so those were relatively difficult. And we are going to do a walkthrough of the solutions on those later today at 2:30, I think is the time. And so that will be downstairs if you're interested in the conference room where we had one of our... Oh, the bigger one. Okay, so the 3 North then will be right over there. And we'll go through kind of each one of these and some general methods. These challenges will also be available on the website. I'll put them back up today. And you can go through and you can solve those at your leisure, right? The ones from previous years are also available. When I was teaching courses on applications of software-defined radios, I would often give those as my exams to my students and just say, hey, there's 12 signals in here, go find 9, and you get an A. And that was a great way for them to learn. So this is a great way to kind of keep up the practice as we go. All right. So the results. This is what we have all been waiting for. I will not make you do the stupid drum roll thing. So in third place, we had the aerospace team Platypus over here. And you have, we have some swag, some prizes for you to win. So great job on Kyle and Caesar. Oh, we're going to get pictures. Awesome. So, thanks, guys. In second place, we have Flame Wires, who, in your second place, you're going to get a swag bag from 3DB, but you're also going to get a Hydra software-defined radio. So you get a new piece of gear for you. So nice job, Don. And by the way, these are players who have come year and year again, and I have learned so much just by working alongside them. You probably didn't see me much in this room because I was busy learning from them. But I promise I'm going to go back and watch all of your papers, so thank you. And then in first place, we had 6DB, who gets a 3DB swag bag. And his own Hydra SDR. So usually Michael is my teammate, but obviously that wouldn't have been fair this year. So he went out on his own and then won it without me. Well done. So thanks again for everybody that participated, everybody that contributed, everybody that asked questions. Even if you didn't get a chance to do it this week, go back and take a look at the challenges. I promise you they're a ton of fun. The channel will be open, so if you have questions about challenges in the future, don't feel like you're imposing on anybody to get out there and ask questions. All right. We did hear some good feedback. I think I mentioned some of this. Some people came and said, hey, I didn't even know there was going to be a CTF, so we're going to publicize that a little more in advance. We hear kind of the team versus individual separation, right? Like, it's not fair that you got a team of 6 people or 2 people, whatever. So we'll think about that. And then there were some comments about, in-person versus remote, because there's a total of, 600 points that are only available if you're here on site. I feel fine about that, honestly. And I think it incentivizes people to come be here in person. And also, we all know that there are effects that happen, especially with RF signals, that you just don't get through IQ files, and it's hard to recreate those. So when you have people moving around, you get different multipath and different attenuation things. So I think it's interesting for us to be able to be here in person and deal with those. So anyway, we hear some feedback. If you have any other feedback, feel free to seek me out, hit me up on the forums, live this dream, and I thank you again again for everything this week. Anything we want to say as we move
I just
on?
want to give another round of applause for Neil, who took this on. Thank you so much, Neil. Really appreciate it. All right, and then we have Josh with the closing.
All right, so thank you, everybody. Everybody who's here in person, everybody who's streaming online. This brings us to the end of the conference. And 1 second, we'll have slides up. But yeah, no, it's just been an incredible week. So much went on this week that, and so many people put so much effort into it. So yeah, just to recap, we had 11 workshops this year. So I think that's a record. I think there was maybe 10 when we were in Arizona. We had 11, and every time I went past the workshop rooms, basically every single one was packed. When we had 2 workshops at the same time, that split some of the crowd, but the workshops being here in person, huge benefit to this conference. We had an outstanding lineup of keynote speakers, so we thank all of our keynote speakers. They made the effort to come here and bring diversity of viewpoints and a lot of different topics that are adjacent, say, to GNU Radio and SDR. So we see a little bit broader perspective of things, and we appreciate that. Everyone that made the effort to come and present, we thank you. So all of the participants that wrote papers, came and presented, interacted with all the people that are here. So thank you to everybody that just came here and supported the conference and presented their work. And so one of the great benefits of being here at the conference is the social events. We had the meet and greet on Monday, and that was an outstanding opportunity, especially because Monday was New User Day. So a lot of new users that came for those introductory level workshops got to head over and have food and drinks right around the corner and meet a lot of people that are active in the community. So I think a lot of good connections were made. I know I got to meet a lot of people that I had seen online, seen their tags and their name, and meet them in person. And that's great to put faces with names and see who you're actually working with. The USERP birthday party was a great event. So thank you to everybody that helped put that together. And I will give a special shout out to Steve and Tina, who did a lot of the legwork. And you'll see Steve and Tina, if you stick around this weekend, is the Zero Retries Digital Conference. So they're organizing that, but they played a tremendous role in getting that USERP birthday party going. And thank you also to NI and Emerson for sponsoring that event and providing the funding for it. Our Capture the Flag we just had, so thank you again to Neil Rogers for stepping up and running that. It was kind of a last-minute thing, but it sounds like it was a tremendous event, and saw lots of people walking around with their laptops and their radios, and so thank you for that. We'll touch on amateur radio exams in just a second, but that's another great tradition of this conference, is the ability for people to come here and take the ham exams and get licensed. We also want to make a special set of thank yous to all of the sponsors, which we'll show in a second, but that set up in the expo hall gives everyone an opportunity to really see what's going on in industry. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of cost for people to support those booths to come here and show what they have and interact with the crowd here. So we appreciate everyone that helped with the expo hall, all the exhibitors, and all of our sponsors. So this afternoon, we will have breakout sessions. Check the schedule. Specifically on amateur radio exams, there were 11 candidates this year. 1 passed extra, 1 general, and 4 technician. So a handful of new exams. All right, so thank you to the Western Washington Ham team who ran the exams, and thanks to Laurel VC for processing. So, all right. So we want to give special recognition to our sponsors, our diamond level sponsors, Aronia, back again this year, Emerson and I here as always, and with their ubiquitous presence in this community, and Any Signal sponsoring for the first time. So I hope you got to interact with them, got to hear what their message is, and check out their talks, talk to people at the booths. Our gold sponsors, Epic, CX2, Peraton Labs, and our silver sponsors. So you can go to the website and you can see the blurb about each of these companies and read about what they do, contact them. So thank you to our sponsors. It's really the only way this event takes place. Thank you to our organizers. The thing I have to continuously reiterate, this is a volunteer group. Like, we do not have any paid staff that organizes this conference. So thanks to Sam. Sam, raise your hand. Sam is the lead organizer. well-deserved applause there. Neil Rogers, it was the technical chair and ran the CTF, so he took on a bunch of different hats. And then Steve and Tina. So Steve and Tina, they found out this conference was going to be here. They are local, and they stepped up and said, we'll help out, and they were just a tremendous help. So we really could not have done this without Steve and Tina. And then also Toby, Seth, Chuck, Andre, Marcus, Neil, and Michael, everybody pitched in their own ways in different capacities. And so there is, I should mention, I think it's further down, but there's a breakout this afternoon where we'll talk about the process of organizing and what we want to do for next year. So we do want your feedback. We want constructive feedback. You know, it is a group of volunteers, so we really do the best that we can. But there's a survey here. Please, please tell us what's on your mind. Tell us what you thought went well, what didn't. It will help make future events go better. If you don't want to do the survey link, if you just want to email us, grcon@gnuradio.org. So really, 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 please do give us your feedback. Even if it's awful and you say, Josh, get off the stage, I'm okay with that. But it's also an opportunity to get involved. So if you have a lot of opinions, you have ideas, get involved for next year's conference. So reach out to us, that same email. There's all kinds of things that go on. And really the amount of things we're able to do at the conference, it depends on who's involved in organizing it. So next year, I should say, we have a tentative location we're not announcing yet. We would like to announce it, but we don't quite have the I's dotted, T's crossed. But what I want to say is the scope of the conference, the things we're able to do, it depends on what kind of team we get to put together to organize it. So come chat with us, let us know what you're interested in helping with, and talk to Sam. That is at 1:45 to 2:45. In which conference room? One of them. So check the schedule. So afternoon sessions, we have 1 p.m. Steve Stroh is going to run a session on SDR and amateur radio. 1:45, Sam is running the session on GRCon planning and feedback about this year. And she's grabbing a mic.
And also, not here is hands-on. So we'll be cleaning up the room, breaking down some of the stuff, but we still have this ballroom, and I know a lot of people have asked, oh, is there someone I can get to help me with this, or I'd like to talk to someone about this. This is, throughout the conference, obviously, but this afternoon, I really encourage you. If you can't find someone, white lanyards, right? Come talk to us, and we'll be able to hopefully help you find the people to talk to about whatever question you have to do or idea that you happen to have. So really encourage you to use that time. I know some people are heading out, but yeah.
Thanks, Sam. But more importantly, GRCon, it's an opportunity for the community to get together in person, but the conversation continues throughout the year. Chat.gnuradio.org, that is our chat server. It's Matrix, Element, however you get there. So that's where kind of active conversation, you're working through problems, you show plots, ask questions, and people are super helpful there. Typically, Marcus jumps in on problems, various people. I met a few people that I've seen their names on there, met them in person. The mailing list, you have more complex problems. You're working on a project, you just want to let people know. Or, sometimes it's like, hey, we're hiring people that have GNU Radio experience. Those are great things to go out on the GNU Radio mailing list. And if you have questions too, info@gnuradio.org. Specifically on GR4, we have an architecture working group. So if you're interested in getting involved in what becomes GR4 and the future of that, architecture@gnuradio.org will get you connected in the right places. Last call for merch. The registration desk is going to close at 12:30. So I think they have deeply discounted last year's t-shirts, and this year's are discounted, so we don't want to ship these away, so go grab them while they're there. And that concludes our main track talk. So thank you again, everybody. And yeah, it's just a fantastic week. I believe lunch will be served shortly, but it's out. Lunch is out. All right. Box lunch.